clicker. They're supposed to be running a video, a drill that we built in the 1980s, and we're just going to run a minute or so of it before a lot of you were alive. There wasn't such a thing as a John Deere drill. This is an all-crop no-till drill, so we can do things with that we can't do with stuff that we have, just one machine that we have now, because it could plant corn and it could plant milo and with planter plates and all those kind of things. I guess it isn't running this morning. Can you make it go? There we go. There it is. How many of you guys know Larry Rickenberger? He's from not too far from here. He's a there. You know him? You related to him? Oh, okay. Larry was working for Farm Industry News at the time, and he's from Kingman, Kansas, the plow capital of the world, right? They got the big plow on the outside of town. And he came up and he had the assignment of taking a bunch of photos of that for the magazine. He really didn't want to do it. And, pulled by an old 706 and whatever. But that thing could do things that we still can't do. But it's not the machinery. That's good enough. You can go back to the, see how that turned? We can't do some of that yet with what we have, but it's not the machinery, it's the thing between the ears. Okay, the machines are just, I used to get the question, what's the best no-till seeder? I'll see if Keith Thompson remembers what he used to say. The Aztec planting stick, right? Because the Mayan and the Aztec, all those castles and stuff people go to visit, their agriculture was all done no-till because they had no beasts of burden. It was all done with a planting stick. So, Dakota Lakes Research Farm is what I do. This is my family. None of them are on my chest anymore. Actually, this is a few years ago when the middle daughter, the one in the middle there, was in Bolivia. But I have a wife and 3 daughters. They're all engineers. They all have master's degrees. They're all very successful, and we have no grandchildren. So, whatever. All depends on what you call success. There's been a long relationship between Dakota Lakes Research Farm and no-till on the plains. And actually, I was at the first conference here. And we were in on getting no-till on the plains started. And that's been a very pleasant journey. We had some real important people, and if you don't know who that is in the hat, that's Matt Hagney. And Matt is a South Dakota guy, grew up not too far from where Dakota Lakes is, and got all excited about doing no-till on his dad's farm after he got his law degree. And then one night he showed up at our farm with everything he owned in the back of his pickup saying, well, I'm going to Kansas because Dad won't let me no-till. Okay? Now, the problem is, if you get into this situation, you're still in that transition, and Dad doesn't want you to no-till, and if you're going to no-till, he doesn't want you to sell the machinery. And that's fine. Just tell him, that's okay, Dad, we can keep the machinery, but if we leave it out, all the hydraulic hoses are going to get rotten, and the tires are going to check, and whatever, so let's take the wheels off of the machines and put them in the shed, and take the hydraulic cylinders off, and put him in the shed, and then be sure he's never going to get the damn thing back out again. Okay? The other 2 people in that photo, Keith, who are the other 2 people in the photo?
Looks like my son.
And? Maybe you?
Me, probably. Dr. Beck, Tom and I were talking, and it was not the Aztec. It was the buffalo you always.
Well, it was buffalo here before that, yeah. I said that too. Doug can't be here today, but that's Doug Pollen and his former self. And we can't forget Ray Ward. And in case you haven't heard this, Ray Ward and I had the same major professor on her PhD. Ray was Paul Carson's first PhD student, and I was his last.
Is that right?
And so we have a lot of connections between Ray and I over the years. And there's the no-till and plains guys visiting and riding on the wagon going out to the field. We have a prairie ecosystem. We do some irrigation, we do some dry land. We now have 7 quarters in a 40, if you talk like we talk in the Midwest. So we have only a little bit of irrigation. We make more money on the dry land than per dollar invested than we do on the irrigation. So as I come across Nebraska, I can't figure out why they want to irrigate everything that doesn't move. Doesn't make any sense. Over the years, I've given talks here. One I called Rose, because everybody's got a name: regenerative ag, sustainable ag, no-till, da-da-da-da. Doesn't make any difference what the hell you call it. It's got to be do some certain things. I did a talk years and years ago called "Do You See What I See?" talking about carbon. We're still talking about carbon. We were doing it, Ruth, my wife Ruth, I think she's in here probably somewhere, or she's over in the coffee room having more coffee. They got a good coffee machine there. But she and I did a conference on carbon sequestration type stuff in 2005. Almost 20 years ago. KISS is keep it simple, stupid. Okay, everybody's got all these fancy things you got to add, you got to do this, you got to no. Just keep it simple. Look at how Mother Nature works. It's simple in terms of how she does things. Society desires clean air, clean water, productive, healthy soil, wildlife and habitat protection, safe, nutritious food, and cheap food. Organic doesn't do about half of that. But we all get off on this organic thing. Doesn't, that dog doesn't hunt. Society here is organic, regenerative, natural. They have no damn idea what we're talking about. Chemical-free, range raised. We've got to communicate with our consumers. We need to base what we do on outputs, not inputs. Everybody looks at inputs. But are you cycling the water the way the nature cycled it? Are you mimicking that natural ecosystem? Are you cycling the nutrients the way Mother Nature did? Outputs. I don't care what you put into that, what are your outputs? Focus on mimicking natural ecosystem processes. We need to be based on science, not on tradition or feelings. Got to be the right answer because it feels good. Well, not necessarily. Science. In nature, tillage is a catastrophic event, and this is one of the biggest threats that we saw as we came down yesterday, as we came from South Dakota across Nebraska and Kansas. When you first have a soil, this is a native soil, you got topsoil on the top, you got topsoil on the bottom, you got these rolling hills. That's what we have in the prairies. And if you start doing tillage, you start pulling the soil off the top of that hill and dragging it down into the bottom. And everybody's, well, I no-till. In Canada, I no-till. They got hoe drills. No, you don't. You're just dragging the stuff down the hill. So hoe drill does more tillage erosion than almost anything. And this is what it looks like. You saw that all the way down here yesterday. And eventually, if I do that long enough, I start pulling the stuff off the top of the hill and covering up the good soils in the bottom of the hill, down in the bottom. And you said, no, that doesn't really happen. This is South Dakota. You notice that those are 4-foot profiles. On the left, that's the top. That's all subsoil. The next one is all subsoil. Now you get down toward the foot slope, it's nice topsoil covered up with subsoil. And you get way in the bottom on the right, you have a whole bunch of subsoil on top of your topsoil. So you're farming all subsoil. That's what you see in other countries. And it's not just mechanized stuff. I went to Rwanda this last summer. They farm on big hills with hoes. The worst tillage erosion is humans with hoes. because you always hold above your feet, not below your feet. You don't do this and pull the soil up. You always do it, start at the top of the hill and go down. So how do you get that stopped? In nature, tillage is a catastrophic event. It's not a natural thing. And people who say, I have natural food, and they're using tillage are damn liars. Okay? So, let's get into real big picture stuff this morning. We got fires in California, we got fires in Brazil, fires in Australia, we got fires in the Great Plains, we got floods in California, we got floods in the Corn Belt, floods in Australia, tornadoes in December. Aquifers are over-appropriated. Yep. Lakes, rivers, and oceans are degraded. Yep. The number and extent of hypoxic zones in the world has doubled every decade since 1960. That's scary. So, we have a problem, and we as a group, not as different factions, we as a group have a problem. You know, it's not a right or left problem or a Democrat or Republican problem. It's similar to what happened in 1898 when Sir William Crookes addressed the British Association for Advancement of Science and said we're all going to starve to death. UK and all advanced civilizations were going to starve because of lack of nitrogen. They had mined all the guano islands off the coast of South America. Right? They had degraded all their soils. They didn't have enough nitrogen, so they were peeing in bottles. True story. So they had enough nitrogen to grow crops. Well, what happened? Why didn't the developed world starve to death? We developed the Haber-Bosch process. Produce nitrogen fertilizer from air. The air is 80% nitrogen. The problem is getting it from here into the soil. The problem with the Haber-Bosch process is it uses fossil fuels. And it uses the fossil fuels as a source of hydrogen, not the energy. It needs the hydrogen. You take hydrogen, mix it with the nitrogen to make ammonia. We can do that with electricity. So if having a problem with fossil fuels is a problem, which it is, we can use electricity from renewable sources and make ammonia. And in fact, we're in the process of starting to build plants in the area north of Dakota Lakes in Sully County to do just that, make our own ammonia. The other thing they use a lot of cheap energy for when you have wind farms that sometimes have power and sometimes don't, so you got to have stuff you can just use when the stuff is cheap, is Bitcoin manufacturing, or whatever, mining, call it mining. So what are we going to do? Well, we can't figure out where we're going unless we know where we've been. Humans got here 200,000 years ago. It began doing plants and animals on purpose till 11,000 years ago, just yesterday. All the energy was human labor, or in the East, animal power. The Western Hemisphere had no beasts of burden. Think about a dog, right? Can't put a dog on a plow. So all the great civilizations, the Missourians just north of here, go up to St. Louis and whatever, that's all done with human labor. So it was all done no-till, basically. A human can exert a 1/20 of the horsepower, not me anymore, and oxen produces about a half a horsepower. Early farming systems were often polycultures, especially in the Western Hemisphere, and when negative feedback loops occurred as the land degraded, the normal protocol was to move. And they did, the early settlers did that here. They'd come in and they'd grow tobacco in the east, and when it got bad, they'd move to another field. There's not any more fields left. When civilization become less mobile, we increased demand for stuff, but we also degraded the soils more. The products that were grown at that time were their only source of food, feed, and fuel. So they were doing all of that, and that's what people are saying, that's what we need to do now. Well, okay, but we maybe can't do all those things with biological sources. Progress is limited because there's not enough energy to both produce food and have energy for transportation. You're going to have one guy carry corn someplace to trade it. He can only take 20 or 30 pounds. He can't take a lot. Empires like the Romans began to expand their territory to increase food and labor, land and slaves. So after several centuries of doing that, both in Asia, the Romans coming up through Europe and whatever, you end up with something like this. And Ruth and I were in France about 6-7 years ago, and they kept showing us their castle. We were traveling from place to place giving talks, and everybody wanted to show you their castle. And you go out and you look at the castle and go, yeah, that's cool. And then you look around the castle and the soil's all degraded. And you say, well, where'd you get the grain to put in the granaries in the castle? And they said, well, around the castle. And I said, but it's all degraded now. Well, that's probably the reason nobody lives in the castle anymore. Right? If you think about it. It's like, and so there's a French field. And they keep plowing it deeper. But there's no more organic matter down there. So what do? Circular biological systems were being replaced by linear systems focusing on extracting resources. It's all been a mining operation. In the United States, it's still mostly a mining operation. Right? It's not farming. It's mining. And I'm talking to the choir here, but whatever. The speed of degradation was initially limited due to lack of energy to transport it. You couldn't produce and transport and whatever, so you didn't have a huge market. That changed abruptly with the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s. Development of coal and other fossil fuels meant that lack of energy was less of a limiting factor. Now that's not very long ago. A little over 100 years, and they started to really ramp up fossil fuel use, and they let us do lots of things. That's fine, but we need to find a better way to do things. Fossil fuel was the engine for the Industrial Revolution. If we were going to produce 2.3 million tons of steel, you need steel to make railroad ties. We need steel to make tractors and railroad engines and all that stuff. And if we're going to make steel from wood and make 2.3 million tons, which is what they made in 1850 in the UK, it would require cutting a forest of 97,000 square miles every year. That's a big area of forest to cut down just for energy, right? That's greater than the total surface area of the UK, so that couldn't happen. So we're stealing that energy from the past and using it to make railroads and things now. And the railroads allowed us to ignore the constraints that we normally would have ignored. And we're still doing that. Transportation systems made it possible to increase the speed and extent of extraction of resources, and the transportation system made it possible to operate linear systems because I could bring in stuff from outside. So what did the Europeans do? They're running out of stuff. Well, we'll go out. We'll go out to other places like Australia, New Zealand, and North America. This is a little rock thing that most of you have seen if you came to No-Till on the Plains Tours. We'll usually try to take the bus up top the hill across the river from here. There's a plaque was buried there in 1847 claiming that area for France. The LaBiandre brothers. They came from Winnipeg and came across the Continental Divide and started exploring to find a way to the west, but also looking for new land. Do you ever wonder why we bought the Louisiana Purchase from France? That's the reason. They claimed it for France, and they found that lead plate across the river from Pierre. We're looking for things to explore, beavers, and other things like that, and gold, and all kinds of good things. How many people seen the movie The Revenant? Yeah, that's done on the prairie. There's no damn trees where that happens. It's a true story. But it was western South Dakota. Then western South Dakota, there's no trees. God didn't put any trees there. 1796, George Washington and Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson were changing letters saying in a few years more increased sterility will drive the inhabitants of the Atlantic states westward to look for new land. Right? Duh. We got to do a better job taking care of what we got. 1796, did they take their own advice? Nope. 1803, we bought Louisiana Purchase, right? And let's go get new land. Hell with it. We'll just forget about it. So that comes up, that's their route up past Dakota Lakes. They would have walked right across the south side of our property there between the river and our property. That's what it looks like now. We're getting the tall grass prairie back. Native American communities in central South Dakota before the horse were agriculturally based with mixed cropping and hunting. If you don't have a horse on the prairies and you're trying to be a hunter-gatherer, you're going to starve to death. Right? They hunted buffalo by chasing them over the cliffs, right? The Lewis and Clark expedition purchased corn from Native American farmers at Bismarck. No-till farmers. Think about that. I gave a talk like this one time early on in Bismarck, North Dakota, and suggested that when their CRP came out, they should put in diverse rotations and no-till and grow some corn. And one of the federal USDA research guys that was in the audience jumped up and says, we can't grow corn in North Dakota. And me being the nice guy I am, I said, well, hell, the Indians grew, Native Americans grew corn right here before we showed up. So maybe the federal government can get their research in gear and get up to that level eventually. He didn't talk to me for a while. But when we removed the animals, the native animals, and replaced them with our stuff and did start doing tillage-based farming, we had severe degradation. How long did it take? Less than 50 years separated statehood in South Dakota and the Dust Bowl. It happened in a hurry. Degraded soils and no beavers resulted in dust storms and crop failures, while at the same time severe flooding was occurring on the Missouri River. So not only did we have droughts, we had floods because the water cycle was broken. Outputs, not inputs. So what does a white man do when he has this problem? He builds a dam, right? Why didn't we just put the beavers back? It would be a hell of a lot easier. We wouldn't have all the problems we're having now with our dams. They put the dams in and they were going to irrigate 500,000 acres, something like that, in central South Dakota on a floodplain, which was a stupid idea. But since the water was there were guys like Ralph and the Cronins and whatever that a lot of you met that decided to start irrigating, using high pressure irrigation to spread the water on so it don't go on so fast, and they had runoff. They were treating a symptom. They're putting water on because we don't have enough water. You have to put more water on, more irrigation. If you quit doing tillage, you don't need to have the irrigation. You use the water Mother Nature gives you. Treating the symptom instead of addressing the cause. So who's responsible for all this stupidity? And all the girls would say the men were. I have 3 daughters. Remember, I've been trained. Ruth doesn't like when I do this. I said, 3 daughters and a wife wasn't what I had in mind when I asked the genie for a house full of women. So, And we're going to claim we didn't know. We didn't know better. Well, we did know better. Plowman's Folly by Faulkner. I think it was the 20th anniversary or something. We were coming down and we're in a van, and somebody said, if you could read one book, what should I read? And I said, the first one you should read is Plowman's Folly. Never heard of it. We get to this little celebration. Keith would have been there when Bud and I got our little plaques or whatever. Was that the 20th? Yeah, 9 years ago. And we get to this, and the first thing is somebody gets up and starts talking about the Plowman's Folly. Yes. So, Conquest of the Land, The Worst Hard Times, Dirt by David Montgomery. The car on the front of the Dirt book was taken, that photo was taken in South Dakota. We had David Montgomery, who was speaking at this conference one year in the green room. I said, you should come and see what that land looks like now. And he did. And he wrote another book called Growing a Revolution. So if you know some of those guys up there in Dakota Lakes, they're in the book. It's kind of interesting, actually. Civilization Critical by Darren Coleman, who was here a few years ago, I think. Probably a little controversial, but a lot of what he says got a lot of sense. We did know, and we do know, but we don't want to change. We want to do the same thing we've always done. Present government, economic, and social systems favor degradation over regeneration. I hear the South Dakota soybean advertisement or whatever on radio in South Dakota, and the guy said, well, over half the soybeans we grow in the U.S. have to be exported. Where's all the nutrients going? Are they going to send them back? Right? Several years ago, we had a Taiwanese trade delegation visiting, because we get those close to the capital when they come out. And it's all through a translator, and I'm showing them my wheat's growing and the cover crop's dying, and I'm saying, well, the nutrients that were in the cover crop are now going to the wheat. And they said, well, we don't need to use fertilizer, is what they said. You don't need to use fertilizer if that's happening. And I said, well, no, we need to use fertilizer if I'm going to sell you my wheat. Unless you're willing to go to your sewage treatment plant, take the sludge and send it back to us. And they translated that, and everybody got this really shocked look on their face. And I'm going, okay, now we have a diplomatic problem. And then all of a sudden they started laughing and making shoveling things. And the translator told me later that it's an ancient Chinese tradition that if you go to somebody's house for dinner, you go to the bathroom before you leave. To leave the nutrients you'd be taking with you. Okay? Because that's what they used for nutrients when they had their cyclic system. United States, I did this one here in 2014. The total United States government subsidy for crop insurance in 2013 was $14 billion. It's higher than that now. But the federal budget for all agricultural research in 2013 was $2.6 billion. It makes no damn sense. We're giving people crop insurance, subsidizing crop insurance, and we're not doing enough research to keep them from needing that. And we don't have policies that keep them from needing that. We're actually encouraging them, some of them, to take advantage of it. I know it's nobody in this room, but it's your neighbors. Total direct subsidy for agriculture in 2019 was $22 billion, in addition to the crop insurance. And we got another disaster payment coming now, right? Supposed to be? Where are we going? I don't think they're going to keep giving us money, is what I'm saying. I worry about that. Obviously, we need to take a different model. Agriculture research and policy development need to be done differently. We think Dakota Lakes is an answer. I think no-till on the plains might be part of the answer. Is groups of us that have more long-term goals, right? So there's our place again. We didn't set out in central South Dakota when we started. We set out to try to stop water from running off of irrigators. But we also set out to try to better manage the ecosystem, because some of you might have been on that bus we got caught in the dust storm early on. We had a lot of those going on. Roads being closed because of blowing dirt. So we didn't set out to do that. The two stars are the two research farms we run over the years. The one on the left is Dakota Lakes. We did a comparison for the border regions of corn, soybean, spring wheat, winter wheat, and sunflower production in central, north central, and south central South Dakota, thing divided by those lines. In 2014 as compared to 1986. And we use those two dates because they have an almost identical rainfall. And we know in 86 nobody was no-tilling, or very few. In 2014 we had quite a few. The difference on that date and using the same price was $1.6 billion. And if you've driven through going up to Gabe's from our place, that whole area there is very, very, very developed in terms of big grain bins and new houses and big shops and lots of green machinery, right? All those things happen when you have a lot of money. We had, I think the guy's name was Duvider, right? Was there an extension economist here by that name? And he didn't think that no-till made any sense. And his boss was a South Dakotan, so he sent a bunch of guys up to visit me one day. But we only had like 8 hours total, and we were supposed to show them. So, wasn't even 8 hours, probably about 6 hours. And so I took him around to a bunch of different people's places, and I said, this guy's a no-tiller, he's got a new house. And I went to the next guy and go, he's not a no-tiller, he doesn't have a new house. And they kept doing that. And they got kind of grumpy with me, but I said, a farmer doesn't build a new house until he doesn't know what else to spend his money on, right? That's the last thing you do, you know, is to build the house. You have to be pretty financially secure. And then I took him to a restaurant, and Kent Tinkler and Ralph Holsworth came in with their books and opened the books and showed them that the difference was diversity. The difference was diversity, not necessarily the no-till. The no-till allowed diversity. And I think in Kansas and Nebraska, we forget that part. If you no-till and don't diversify, you're going to have a problem. And I'll talk about some of that tomorrow. But it's diversity is the key. We're allowed to grow corn, which nobody thought we could grow. We could do wheat and summerfell. But we now grow a crop every year, and some of those guys in the good soil areas this year were going over 200 bushels an acre dry land corn. That makes money even at $4. Okay. The success was not achieved because we set out to improve yields, rather the goal was to better manage the ecosystem. Outputs. What's happening to your water, what's happening to your nutrients, your pHs are changing, those kind of things. Unfortunately, most of this is just doing the wrong thing better if we continue to export it. We've got to push that higher. If the Chinese need beans to have pigs, keep the beans, grow the pigs, and ship them to pigs. Because most of the nutrients in the pigs stay here. Most of the nutrients in a cow, when you sell a cow, she takes very little nutrients away. Most of the nutrients stay on the land. The light bulb was not invented by incrementally making candles better. We didn't go out and see if we can. I stole that from somebody, but it's so damn good. You think about it. Now, the reason we think differently is my undergrad degree is in chemistry. So we don't do research the same way in chemistry as they do in a lot of agronomy. So we started looking at systems. No-till is not a goal, it's a tool. We need to do that in order to manage the ecosystem. You can't manage the ecosystem if you do tillage. Mother Nature doesn't do tillage. Water cycle, energy flow, mineral cycle, community dynamics. Those are the things you look at. Water cycle. Does your water feed your plants and recharge groundwater, or does it run off or percolate? Keith was telling me a story today about the neighbor's water. Jimmy Emmons tells you a story about the neighbor's water, right? It's all about the water. We put 2 inches of water on in 9 minutes, and you can walk in the field behind the irrigator and don't get your feet muddy. So coming this summer, we'll do that. We do that with you guys? Yeah, we did that with that much too. Okay. That's the greatest thing we do. People just go, all these paradigms just go. So there's my guy with the pivot. We now put 2 inches of water on in 9 minutes. No runoff. No-till is not about lack of tillage, but about managing the water, the soil structure, biology and carbon compounds. And all the speakers that follow me today got ideas on that. Ecosystems harvest sunlight energy to drive all their processes. If you take the products from the ecosystem, it reduces the energy. We're not going to use our corn stalks to make ethanol. We're not going to use our corn stalks to make boards. We can't afford to lose that stuff. We might be able to grow some perennials and take some perennial grass to make lumber. It's one of the things we're going to look at. Energy. Is the energy you use at your farm, you're going to have to use energy, is it constant or finite? Well, fossil fuels are finite. The sun is constant. Sun's going to come up tomorrow. If it doesn't come up tomorrow, let's get out that Pendleton and have a party, because it's not going to last very damn long. Is it benign or potentially damaging? The sun, unless you're a white Caucasian guy that doesn't wear sunscreen, is pretty benign. And it's yours. You own it. It's internal. Fossil fuels you get from somebody else. Why are we so damn in love with fossil fuels as farmers? That's stuff we have to buy from somebody. I get sun every day. We're building our solar panels now. We're going to use those to power all this stuff at our buildings and our electric truck, and make some nitrogen fertilizer. Okay? It's mine. I don't have to borrow it from anybody. 80% of the total input cost of agriculture can be traced directly to energy. Scary. Fossil fuel input in agriculture 140 years ago was 0. In less than 100 years, probably 20, it'll have to be 0 again. 1970, the average wheat price was $1.37 a bushel. You should be feeling good about 4. Right? Or 5. 5's good. I mean, what the hell's wrong with that? The average price of a barrel of oil was $3.39. What is that today? 70s. Look at that ratio. And we're using 80% of that $70 oil to grow the $1.37. See, that ratio is all wrong. It takes approximately 1 gallon of diesel fuel to produce, transport, and apply 5 pounds of N. So this Minnesota guy, I need to go do a week in Minnesota. And the week after next, I spend the whole week in Minnesota. You can always tell a Minnesotan, but you can't tell them much. It's kind of like a Texan on steroids, right? If a Minnesota farmer applies 150 pounds of N per hectare, the energy involved is 30 gallons an acre of diesel, just for the nitrogen. Scary. But if I can make it with my own sunlight, I don't care. Right? A whole different. More than the energy used for tillage, seeding, and harvest. Use of inorganic nitrogen fertilizer was essentially 0 prior to 1950. In the United States, it was 50 million tons in 2010. Dakota Lakes Research Farm will be fossil fuel neutral by 2026. That's next year. Hopefully I'll be retired again by then. We do not have a choice. You know, we got to get rid of some of this stuff. And all of us need to stop using fossil fuels now. We've got to get that done. So we're doing our oil pressing. If you've been there, you've seen some of that. We use, if I sell oil, what's left to farm? Sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water. Mother Nature will bring me sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water for free. Right? I haven't exported anything. Total energy used on Earth in 2012 for everything was 560 exajoules, or 1.6 times 10 to the 13th, or 16 trillion kilowatt hours. That's a lot. 86% of the non-food energy was from fossil fuels. Estimates of the total solar energy at the Earth's surface range from 1,600 to 40,000 exajoules per day. The other one was per year. This is per day. That means one day of sunlight is 400 to 800 times as much energy as that used in a whole year. We don't have an energy problem. We have an energy source problem, but we don't have an energy problem. There's plenty of energy out there. Just got to figure a better way. And given fossil fuel has been cheap and easy and convenient, but it's a problem. Are the nutrients available for plant use and environmental services, or have they been leached, eroded, or transported from the landscape? Sent to China, right, or Taiwan, or the ocean, the hypoxic zone off of the Gulf of Mexico. Ecosystems that leak nutrients turn into deserts. So that's what we're doing. We're busy trying to make a desert out here. 120-car train of soybeans contains 450,000 pounds of phosphate. And they're just going west. Saline seep puts them down in the bottom area. You got a saline seep. This happens in Australia, where they take the bush out, they don't balance their rainfall, and they get salinity. Reduction in pH, organic matter, or fertility are symptoms of poor nutrient and water cycling. So we need to think of all aspects of agriculture and society. Trying to export more products is probably not the answer. If we're exporting our nutrients, we should get paid for them. We have farmers that have livestock that never put up hay. They buy hay because their neighbors are willing to sell their hay for less money than what the nutrients in the hay is worth. Right? 1973, the Soviet Union was a net importer of wheat in the U.S. Remember Earl Butz? Thank God almost none of you do, but there's a few of us that do. Farm fence row to fence row. We're going to sell the Russians all this wheat. So everybody got all crazy and did all kinds of stupid things. And then we got an overabundance of wheat, and then we got 24% interest rates. So you guys that are paying 7, think 24. Okay? So we were going to do that. What's wrong with that idea of making money by exporting stuff? In 2016-17, Russia became the world's #1 wheat exporter. Oh, that wasn't a good idea. Okay? If you look at 17-18, Russia and Ukraine together exported, before they started fighting, exported more wheat than the U.S. produces. Russia and Ukraine have taken over for what we were going to do. It didn't make any sense, right? Weeds and diseases are nature's way of adding diversity to a system that lacks diversity. We fight that not by throwing more herbicides out there. We fight that by trying to add beneficial diversity of our own. You see very few weeds if you go out into real natural systems. There's just not any weeds there because they don't have the opportunity. Within all texture groups, as organic matter increases from 1 to 3%, available water holding capacity doubles. The reason Keith needs to get more residue, right? Like Carlos told you needed, Carlos years ago told him you needed more residue. Is we're going to build the organic matter. It takes nitrogen and other minerals to build organic matter. Ray Ward would tell you that. You can't just add carbon, you got to have all the stuff that goes with it to make organic matter. When organic matter content increased to 4%, then it's 60% available water holding capacity. You have to no-till to build organic matter back to where it was when we had prairie here. And then you can do things. 200 bushel corn in Potter County happens because they now have better organic matter, better cycling and whatever. When they did wheat summer fallow, 35 bushel wheat on fallow was pretty damn good. And that's where Matt Hagney grew up. This is what you're trying to emulate. This is a root system on a native prairie. Those big blue stems and switch and whatever go 8 to 12 foot deep. And they bring the line back to the surface so your pH doesn't go down. I think we're going to have perennial sequences in. And we're working on that now. What does Mother Nature do? She makes maximum use of water and nutrients by having webs of mycorrhizal and other tricks. Mycorrhizae are really important to nutrients. Really important to water. If you do tillage, you don't have mycorrhizal fungi because you break all their hyphae. She uses animals, big ones and little ones, as part of the system. In dry, like here, brittle, Ellen Saver calls them brittle. In dry climate, soil biology slows during times of low soil moisture. The rumen of the grazing animal remains moist, continuing that biological process through the dry period. That's the role of animals in nature. In cold climates, like Wichita, soil biology slows during times of low soil temperature. The rumen of grazing animals remain warm and continues the process during the winter. So we have started doing swath grazing, started this years ago. We will grow cover crop, this is on irrigated ground, do some of this on dry land. We swath the oats and triticale and whatever. This is in the fall, right before freeze. And then we graze it over the winter. And it stays green. You don't have to bale it up and whatever, and you don't have to haul it, and you don't do all those things. We use our irrigators to move the fence, which is a slick trick. My daughter the other day was complaining to somebody that when she worked for me one winter, she had to go move the fence. And it was really cold and whatever. And I said, all you gotta do is push the damn button and get back in the pickup and wait for it to move. Get out of the pickup and hook up the hot wire again. Yeah, but it was cold. And I'm going, well, okay, but whatever. And they spread the manure. They do that whole cycle all by themselves. The only way to produce human edible protein, people are talking about this alternative meat thing. Well, they're doing that with peas and soybeans and whatever to get the protein. You can't grow peas and soybeans and things on marginal land. The only way to produce human edible protein on marginal land is to use a ruminant animal. We need 40 million more cows and goats and sheep. The number one meat eaten in the world is goat. Unfortunately, doing all these things is only stopping the bleeding. Climate models estimate that global temperatures will increase by at least 1.5 degrees centigrade by 2026. Too late. We exceeded that in 2004. That's scary. They're saying, well, we're going to try to keep it under 1.5. Well, too late. Winter. When this happens, soil carbon levels will decline. I have more organic matter at the same rainfall than Keith does. Amarillo, Texas, Pierce, South Dakota, Brandon, Manitoba gets the same rainfall. Amarillo, Texas is a desert. Pierce, South Dakota is a mixed grass prairie. Brandon, Alberta is trees and tall grass prairie. Same rainfall. But Hans Yenny, if you haven't read Hans Yenny's book, spelled with a J, J-E-N-N-Y, it's on the internet, just download it and read it, it's about 40 pages. Factors of soil formation. Rainforests, peat bogs, oceans are all going to lose more carbon. So it's kind of like a hamster on a wheel. What happens with a carbon offset and sequestration programs? You agreed to put a certain amount of carbon in your ground, now the soil warms up. You can't do it anymore. Can't get the same response. Agriculture cannot do this alone. We need all society to have this brain transplant, to think differently. Not just us. Ecosystem degradation is a symptom, not a problem, it's a symptom. The problem is indifference, greed, jealousy, selfishness, ignorance. That's the cause. Bureaucracies, governments, and corporations are operated by people with limited tenure, short term. I've been at Dakota Lakes, this will be our 35th year of operation. I worked for the government about 4 years before that. I probably had 20 different deans and directors and presidents and whatever. But the goals of Dakota Lakes have not changed. Long term, 600 years. Societies and landowners and farmers deserve to have long-term research. We need to demand that they put that formula system back in where we can get long-term research instead of short-term grant. We look forward 600 years. What's it going to be like? We do this with the Dakota Lakes Board. We look ahead 600 years in some of our meetings, once a year. They go, ooh, geez. South Dakota will still have a continental climate. Might be warmer, whatever, that's going to change, but it'll still have cold winters and hot summers. Degradation of the ecosystem will have more impact on what you can do in your farm than what climate change will. If you don't have the organic matter and whatever cooking, then you're going to be more impacted. Doing the right thing environmentally is almost always the correct economic approach in the long run. That should be stenciled someplace in somebody's forehead. Yeah, or maybe the majority leader of the Senate, we could do that. You guys had Bob Dole at one time, right? Now we got one, we got John too, and we had Tom Daschle on the other side, majority leader in the Senate. He gave us freedom to farm, so we're hoping soon we'll do something at least that good. Freedom to farm is a good deal for no-till guys. The best time to make a transformational change, have a brain transplant, or at one time I came here and talked about the moonshot, right? Think about John Kennedy. Going by the end of the decade, we're going to put a man on the moon and bring him safely home. He didn't talk about incrementally making rockets better or whatever. He said our goal is to do this. Our goal is to get carbon out of our fossil fuel carbon out of our farming system. I don't care how you do it. The second best time is now. I'm not sure we're going to get another chance if we keep screwing around. Take the E out of ET and take the T out of can't, which is really important. That one's really the most important thing I ever said. So, my wife says, geez, you got to talk for an hour. I said, it won't take me that long. Okay? Any questions, comments? Any rocks to throw?
I will say one thing, that if you're going to build a pond, you know, my dad spent a lot of years building ponds up at our ranch. And over the last 4 or 5 years, although our rainfall hasn't been that low, I mean, it's been a little below normal, been a little hotter, obviously, 3 degrees last year.
Nothing in your pond.
Ponds are dry. Grass looks great. Ponds are dry. And so if you're going to build a pond, build it next to your tillage neighbor or next to a neighbor that doesn't know how to manage his grass, because then you'll get his runoff and you can catch it. But just know that we've been 27 years of no-till now, and our ponds have a very difficult time catching rain. We had a 5.5, 6 inch rain twice in the last year. And we got very, very little water in our ponds. So it does change the way you manage the water. Springs are flowing great.
Yeah, and the pond should fill from the bottom.
They start to.
Yeah. The springs are should fill.
Springs are running.
Yeah. But we can go have coffee too, that's fine. You wanna do that and visit with the,
Right here.
Dr. Beck, talk to us a little bit more about your oil production. Is it from sunflower seeds or is it canola, rapeseed? Share us a little bit more about that.
yes, all those, all the above. We have a cold press, so we just put them in there. Canola and sunflower and flax are high in oil. They're, 45–50%. Canola will give us about 60 to 80 gallons of straight vegetable oil per acre. And the meal is somewhere around 40% protein. And so sunflower meal especially is good for cattle because you just do it with the shells on, so all the shell comes through, and then that gives that cow a lot of roughage in the rumen. But we do all of those. It's a fairly simple process. They just have to be kind of clean and dry, and you just run them through the machine. The one that's the toughest is soybean because it doesn't give you as much oil. Soybeans are only 18, 19, 20% oil. So you don't get as much oil, and then the meal has that trypsin inhibitor in it. So you can't really feed the meal without heating it somehow. You can to cows to a certain extent, but to any monogastric you can't. But interesting side note, some of you know I do some things with Howard Buffett, and not a lot, but some. But he's really engaged in Ukraine. If you get Farm Journal, you kind of figure that out. So the problem they have there is the Russians are going after the grid, and they know that the grid is bad because they built it. and the grid just sucks, and a lot of what the Russians built just sucks. They're not real good engineers. But so Howard was bringing in diesel-powered generators, but you don't necessarily have diesel fuel. But I recommended that they get straight vegetable oil generators, because if you live in Germany, you can buy a generator that has a motor that burns straight vegetable oil. Now you can take straight vegetable oil and make it into biodiesel with transesterification, but you can get a motor, you can get a tractor, you can get a John Deere tractor, Caterpillar tractor, any kind of tractor you want in Germany that burns straight vegetable oil. So all I have to do with my oils to burn them is put them through a 1-micron filter, so it doesn't have any particles in it. And so what they're doing in Ukraine now is bringing in SVO generators and then presses to press their canola that they can't sell to make oil that they can run their own electrical system.
All politics is local, and I've heard really good things from you today that I'd like to put together in a little bit. You quoted the Bible. Agricultural systems probably started in the Mideast. Degradation certainly developed there. For example, the Romans salting the Carthage land, the tillage with animals. You gave the good example of bringing topsoil from high down to fill the harbors, and that made a big problem with the expansion of the Roman Empire, so we've seen all that before. Now we have great ideas here where we can do things on our own, but we live in a world that's not friendly necessarily to successful people, Ukraine being a good example of that. With all of this going on, and I understand, and you are presenting regenerative agriculture, if I can use that term, as a national security asset, and as a family asset, as a local community asset. I think all of us in here would agree with that. But how do we survive in a world like we have right now? I appreciate your comments.
I don't know. I mean, we need the people that are in charge of things to take an interest in doing the long-term things. And Dakota Lakes has been there. There've been a lot more of you who come and visited our farm than politicians from South Dakota. We did have Governor Dugard come. He was great. He was the one before Christie. Christie never came, so, you know, it's 17 miles. Kind of hard. We do get our Secretary of Agriculture about once a year sometimes, but not for in-depth stuff, just to be there at the field day so everybody saw that he was here. And yeah, I don't know how we do that. I mean, it really is a thing that I think we just are going to have to stomp our feet and demand the right things. But what we do is demand money a lot of times. I want money for my disaster program or whatever, but what we really need is we need support for the long-term thing, and I don't know how to get there. But Ruth went to a meeting. She was the extension agronomy person, best, you know, the best crop scout that there is, in my opinion. But anyway, she went into the university, and we'd had some new administration that wasn't very friendly to us. And she came back and she said, do you know that you have a learning community? I said, what's a learning community? She said, well, you have one. We don't know what it is, but they used you as an example of a learning community. And then they're going to send all these people out for me to teach them what a learning community was. And they show up and I have no idea, but what I did is I took and wrote down the goals of Dakota Lakes Research Farm and who's involved. And right now we have someone on our board of directors that is a great-grandson of one of the guys that's involved in starting the thing. Imagine that. See, but that's why your families operate, generation to generation to generation. And that's why your communities have to operate. And then I gave all the names of all the people I had as deans and directors and all their goals over the 25 years that they were talking about at that time. They're all different. And you get to change government, we get a totally different change in ag policy. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Agriculture hasn't changed. You know, it's the same. So I don't know. You tell me. I'm retired. Yeah.
Dwayne, I've read a little bit about the process you talked about using electricity on your farm to produce the end.
Yep.
Would you explain, because it sounds crazy.
It is crazy.
Yeah.
But when I taught chemistry, I made this little thing that looked like an H. Okay? And I put water in there, and I passed electricity through it. And one side, hydrogen was formed, because electricity went through the water, and hydrogen was coming up here, and the other side, oxygen was formed. And then we got twice as much hydrogen as oxygen because it's H2O. That was a neat thing, and you could take the cork out and put a little spark there, and the hydrogen would go boom, and you put it in the oxygen doesn't burn, right? It just helps things burn, so the little wood stick would get big. It's not simple, but you get the hydrogen. Now you can use the hydrogen for fuel. You can use the hydrogen to run fuel cells. All the early space, even today, the stuff that runs their electricity for them in space, the guys in space, is hydrogen. Right? It's all hydrogen fuel cells that does all their stuff and gets their electricity for them in space. So it's not like new technology. You take that hydrogen and you need a catalyst and you need some pressure, and it reacts with nitrogen in the air. 80% of the air is nitrogen. So you just react your hydrogen with a catalyst and some pressure. That's the Haber-Bosch process. You get ammonia. And Haber-Bosch was really important. There's a book called The Alchemy of Air that talks about that. Haber-Bosch, this is during World War I and II period, when you needed nitrogen for explosives. So the number one bombing mission in World War II was to knock out the nitrogen plants of the Germans. So it talks all about that. But they're just, but they're using fossil fuels. So we're just changing that. I talked about using hydrogen. My senior paper as an undergraduate, I won't tell you how many years ago it was, Keith, was on hydrogen fuels. because we knew then already we needed to do something. And using hydrogen fuel. And the next interesting thing there is once you have ammonia, most of you probably use a lot of urea, right? How do you make ammonia into urea? Chemistry. You mix it with CO2. So urea is actually a carbon dioxide with an ammonia on each end. You knock off the water. One hydrogen from each of the ammonias and one of the oxygens from the carbon dioxide. So the ethanol plant at Oneida that you came up there, you've driven by that ethanol plant, it's a 100 million gallon ethanol plant. It puts off 270,000 tons of CO2 a year. 270,000 tons of CO2 come from making that 100 million gallons of ethanol. That's the stuff they want to put in pipelines and get the hell out of there because it counts against their carbon index. But I can take that 270,000 tons of CO2 and mix it with my ammonia from these plants they're putting out west of Oneida and make urea. And we can make enough urea out of that 270,000 tons of carbon dioxide to put 150 pounds of N on 1.3 million acres of land. That's a lot of carbon dioxide. But that's one good way to get rid of it. And then it doesn't count. If you look at that GREET thing, where they do the calculations, right? That counts as a zero, your fertilizer is zero carbon if you do it that way. Absolutely zero carbon. What a deal. Right? Win the lottery.
You got one more.
Okay.
Salinity. I've heard you in numerous presentations in the past talk about we need to utilize the water.
Yep.
Because that's what's causing salinity issues.
Yep.
Are you guys seeing salinity issues creeping in more and more in South Dakota? Because I feel like in Kansas, it's gonna start to snowball. I think we have a lot more salinity issues than a lot of producers realize. And I don't think there's enough gypsum where they can't afford to go spread enough gypsum to balance it out.
Well, it's not gypsum that balances it out, because gypsum is another one, is part of what you're gonna find in that saline seep. So if you have a saline seep, what you have there is gypsum. So if you've had somebody do a 4-foot probe, and you see white stuff down there about 3 foot probably, can't even tell me how deep it is, how deep's your line in Kansas? About 4 feet. And if you move that water consistently down, it finds a layer down there someplace and goes sideways. And so below the lime is gypsum. So that's at 4, gypsum's at 5 or 6. And you can tell the difference with an acid bottom. But it goes sideways. And is it a problem in South Dakota? It's huge. And not where we are as much. But further east, it's a huge problem because they decided they're just going to do nothing but corn and soybeans. Nolan, how many people know who Nolan Ryan was? Yeah. Nolan Ryan had more than a fastball. Right? He wouldn't have been a good pitcher if all he had was a fastball. And if you're just doing corn, bean, that's a 2-crop monoculture. It's the stupidest rotation in the world. And you gotta do other things in there. We might need a perennial sequence. Because right now what you do is you're using probably this much of the soil. That's about it. And only for a few months. And a perennial has these roots all the way down forever. So we may have to, and we're starting to do that, we'll put in 5 years of a perennial. And that pulls all that lime up back to the top, and it also sucks out the water, because you're farming this 3 foot or 2.5 foot, and then the bottom underneath that's all full of water, because you've had a big rain at some time or another. We gotta suck that down so we have a place, when you get a big rain, you have a place for the excess to go. And nobody's gonna fund something like that, because you put in a perennial sequence, and they'll take your base away. Right?
Right.
And that's what used to give us all this problem before we had freedom to farm. We had all these base restrictions. And so we were sitting there with a 50% wheat base. Well, wheat something is stupid, just like corn something, that's stupid. We needed to do more diverse rotations, but we couldn't because of farm program thing. And it just happened that Dashiell got into power when we really needed it. And that's where Freedom Farm came from. But we need stuff like that where people realize we need to put in perennial sequences. I might be able to put in perennial sequence and make boards from big blue stem and switchgrass. We harvest it once every 2 years. And we harvest it in the spring. Right? Should be fine, because the roots are staying alive during that period of time. It's not like we've taken everything away. But who in the hell is going to do that kind of research? I was telling Keith about one of their studies. This first results are going to come in 20 years from now. I'm hopefully going to be still drooling in my oatmeal, but.
Okay, Jimmy's gonna go ahead and wrap us up. Then we will go to break, and then you'll pick a breakout session. There's signs around and who's speaking where. So if you have any questions about that process, again, reach out to me or one of the board members.
All right, let's give Dwayne a big round of applause.